The room is quiet, far too quiet for a house shared by 5 college students. It is the early morning of February 1st, 1974, in the University District of Seattle. Inside a basement bedroom, the air is cold. Linda Ann Healy's alarm clock begins to buzz at 5:30 a.m., but she does not reach out to stop it. Her roommates, groggy and confused, eventually enter the room. The bed is made, neat, almost surgical. But when they pull back the covers, they find a dark, damp stain on the pillow and the sheets. Blood. Linda's nightgown is missing from the closet. Hanging there instead is her blue backpack, tucked away as if she had never intended to leave. There are no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no screams heard in the night. Only a chilling void where a 21-year-old girl should have been. Somewhere in the darkness outside, a man is driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle, humming to himself, with a bundle wrapped in a sheet in the back seat. He is handsome. He is articulate. He is a law student. And he has just begun a harvest of souls that will paralyze a nation. Welcome to the Anomaly Archive. To understand the monster, we must first look at the boy. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24th, 1946, at a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. From the very moment of his birth, Ted's life was built on a foundation of lies. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was young and terrified of the social stigma of an illegitimate child. For the first several years of his life, Ted was raised to believe that his grandparents were his parents, and that his biological mother was actually his older sister. Imagine the psychological fracturing that occurs when the person you trust most in the world is pretending to be someone else. Some biographers claim Ted discovered his birth certificate as a teenager, finding the word unknown in the space for his father's name. Others say he was teased by a cousin who showed him the truth out of spite. Regardless of how he found out, the revelation planted a seed of resentment that would grow into a towering inferno of rage. In 1951, Louise moved with Ted to Tacoma, Washington. She married a man named Johnny Bundy, a cook who gave Ted his last name. But Ted never respected Johnny. He saw him as beneath him, uneducated, and working class. Ted wanted more. He wanted status. He wanted power. As a teenager, Ted began to curate a persona. He was a Boy Scout. He was active in the Methodist Church. He was a good student. But behind this all-American facade, the shadows were already lengthening. He began to wander the streets at night, peering through the windows of unsuspecting neighbors. This voyeurism was his first taste of the hunt, the thrill of watching someone who didn't know they were being watched. Every villain has a turning point. For Ted Bundy, that point arrived in 1967 at the University of Washington. Her name was Stephanie Brooks, though she is often referred to by pseudonyms in the literature. She was beautiful, wealthy, and possessed the social grace that Ted so desperately envied. He fell for her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. But Stephanie saw through the cracks. She saw a young man who lacked maturity, a man who had no clear direction in life. In 1968, she ended the relationship and moved back to California. This rejection didn't just break Ted's heart, it decimated his ego. He spent the next several years transforming himself into the man he thought she wanted. He re-enrolled in college, graduated with honors in psychology, and became active in Republican politics. He even worked at a suicide prevention crisis center in Seattle. where he sat side by side with Anne Rule, a former policewoman who would later write the definitive book on his crimes. By 1973, Ted was the perfect man. He re-entered Stephanie's life, courted her, and convinced her he was destined for greatness. They discussed marriage, and then, once he knew he had won her back, he simply stopped communicating. He had proven he could possess her, and then he discarded her. The rejection was repaid. But the internal demon he had conjured to become this man did not go away once the mission was over. It had grown hungry. And in the early months of 1974, Ted Bundy decided it was time to feed. The monster did not emerge fully formed. It practiced in the shadows first. On the night of January 4th, 1974, an 18-year-old student named Karen Sparks was asleep in her bed in a basement apartment in Seattle. A shadow slipped through the window. Coraine, using a steel rod taken from the bed frame, the intruder beat her into unconsciousness and then sexually assaulted her with the same metal rod. Karen survived, but she would spend weeks in a coma and live the rest of her life with permanent brain damage and no memory of the attack. This was the blueprint. Brutal, silent, and efficient. 1 month later, Linda Ann Healy, the girl from our opening story, was not so lucky. Between February and June of 1974, a black hole opened up in the Pacific Northwest. Young women began to vanish at a rate of 1 per month. Donna Manson, 19. Susan Rancourt, 18. Roberta Parks, 22. Brenda Ball, 22. They were all beautiful, all students, and most of them shared a striking physical trait: long hair, parted down the middle. Just like Stephanie Brooks. What made Ted Bundy so dangerous was not just his violence, it was his understanding of human nature. Most predators hide in the bushes, but Ted operated in the light. He realized that people are naturally inclined to help those in need. He began wearing a fake plaster cast on his arm or leg, or hobbling on crutches. He would approach women in public places, struggling to carry a stack of books or loading a sailboat onto his car. "Excuse me, could you give me a hand?" It was a simple request. A polite request. But for the women who stepped toward that tan Volkswagen Beetle, it was the last decision they would ever make. Inside the car, Ted had removed the passenger seat. This allowed him to lie his victims flat on the floorboards, out of sight of any passing motorists, while he drove them to his secondary locations. Usually, these were remote, wooded areas, like Taylor Mountain, where he could take his time. The audacity of the killer reached a fever pitch on July 14th, 1974. On a blazing hot Sunday at Lake Sammamish State Park, thousands of people were out enjoying the sun. A man in a white tennis outfit, with his arm in a sling, was seen walking the beach.
"Excuse me, ladies.
He approached several women,
I hate to interrupt,
introducing
but
himself as
can I
Ted.
get a little help with something?"
He asked for help loading a boat. Some declined, sensing something off about his intense blue eyes or his overly polished charm.
"It's gonna be okay."
But Janice
Here to
Ott,
help.
23 years old, agreed to help.
It will be
She
all
walked
right.
away
Just
with
stay
him.
with me.
And was never seen alive again. But Ted wasn't finished. Mere hours later, from the same crowded park, 18-year-old Denise Naslund vanished while walking to the restroom. 2 women, taken in broad daylight, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses. This was the peak of his God complex. He felt invisible. He felt invincible. The police were flooded with tips. Witness descriptions all pointed to a man named Ted driving a Volkswagen Beetle. 4 different people actually called in the name Ted Bundy to the authorities, including his girlfriend, Elizabeth Klupfer, Klep Fair, and his colleague, Anne Rule. But the police couldn't believe it. How could this clean-cut law student, this rising star in the Republican Party, be the monster they were looking for? He was too normal. Why, he was too handsome. And while the police hesitated, Ted realized the net was closing in. In August of 1974, he packed his bags and moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, to attend law school. A new city, a new hunting ground, and a list of victims that was about to grow much, much longer. By the fall of 1974, Ted Bundy was a law student at the University of Utah. To his classmates, he was a focused, somewhat arrogant peer. But the darkness had traveled with him. In October, the disappearances began again. Nancy Wilcox, 16. Melissa Smith, 17, the daughter of a local police chief. Laura Amy, A.Y.Me, 17. Their bodies were later found in the rugged canyons outside Salt Lake City, showing signs of horrific trauma and postmortem violation. But on November 8th, 1974, Ted's perfect system finally encountered a flaw. Her name was Carol Daranch. While shopping at a mall in Murray, Utah, Carol was approached by a man claiming to be Officer Roseland. He told her someone had tried to break into her car and she needed to come with him to the station. Carol was hesitant, but the man's authoritative tone and clean-cut appearance won her over. She got into his car, a light-colored Volkswagen. Suddenly, he pulled over, whipped out a pair of handcuffs, and lunged at her with a crowbar. Carol didn't freeze. She fought like a whirlwind, screaming, clawing, and eventually throwing herself out of the moving car. She was the one who got away, and she had seen his face. Despite the close call with Carol Daranch, Bundy continued to kill. He drove across the border into Colorado, taking the life of Karen Campbell, a nurse who vanished from a well-lit hotel hallway. But the clock was ticking. On August 16th, 1975, a highway patrol officer named Bob Hayward spotted a tan Volkswagen cruising through a residential neighborhood at 2 a.m. When Hayward tried to pull the car over, the driver sped off, running 2 stop signs before finally stopping. It was Ted. Inside the car, Hayward found a murder kit, a ski mask, a second mask made from pantyhose, a crowbar, an ice pick, and strips of torn sheets. Ted was arrested, but he was cool, collected, and full of excuses.
That is the man.
It wasn't until Carol Daranch picked him out of a lineup that the authorities finally had him. In 1976, he was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years. But the police knew this was only the tip of the iceberg. They began the process of extraditing him to Colorado to stand trial for the murder of Karen Campbell. This was a capital case. If convicted, Ted would face the death penalty. Ted Bundy believed he was smarter than everyone in the room. During his preliminary hearings in Aspen, Colorado, he famously chose to represent himself. This gave him a unique privilege. He was allowed to use the courthouse law library during breaks, and he was not required to wear leg irons. On June 7th, 1977, while the court was in recess, Ted went to the library. He hid behind a bookshelf, opened a second-story window, and jumped. He spent 6 days in the wilderness of Aspen, cold, starving, and lost. He was recaptured after being spotted driving a stolen car. But the first escape was just a rehearsal. 6 months later, back in the Glenwood Springs jail, Ted began to lose weight. Intentionally. He lost over 30 pounds, becoming skeletal. He had discovered a hole in the ceiling of his cell where a light fixture was located. On the night of December 30th, 1977, while the jail staff was short-handed for the holidays, Ted piled books and pillows under his blanket to look like a sleeping body. He then squeezed his emaciated frame through the 12-inch hole in the ceiling, crawled through the ductwork, and dropped into the jailer's apartment while the jailer was out. He walked out the front door, stole a car, and headed east. By the time the guards realized his bed was empty, Ted Bundy was already on a flight to Florida. He was free. He was desperate. And he was about to commit his most barbaric acts yet. In January 1978, Ted Bundy was living in a rooming house near Florida State University under the name Chris Hagen. He was a man with no identity, no money, and a rapidly disintegrating mind. The mask of sanity he had worn so carefully in Washington and Utah was slipping. He was no longer a methodical predator. He was a cornered animal. In the early morning hours of January 15th, 1978, Bundy entered the Chi Omega, KY Omega, sorority house through a back door with a faulty lock. What followed was not a series of calculated murders, but a frantic, animalistic frenzy. In less than 15 minutes, he attacked 4 women while they slept. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were bludgeoned with a piece of oak firewood and strangled. Levy was also bitten, savagely, on her breast and buttocks. 2 other women, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, survived but suffered devastating facial fractures and deep psychological scars. As he fled the house, a sorority sister returning from a date saw him leaving, a club in his hand, a profile silhouetted by the porch light. Still fueled by adrenaline, Bundy walked 8 blocks to the apartment of Cheryl Thomas. He entered through a window and beat her so severely that she suffered permanent deafness and the end of her career as a dancer. The city of Tallahassee, Tallahassee, was paralyzed with fear. The monster was no longer choosing victims from the roadside. He was coming into their homes. Despite the massive manhunt, Bundy managed to evade capture for another month. On February 9th, 1978, he committed his final, and perhaps most unforgivable crime. He abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, from the front of her junior high school in Lake City. Her body would not be found for 8 weeks, discarded in a shed at a state park. The death of a child changed the public's perception of Bundy forever. He was no longer the charming law student. He was a child killer. On February 15th, 1 week after Kimberly vanished, a Pensacola police officer named David Lee spotted a stolen Volkswagen Beetle. When Lee attempted to arrest the driver, Bundy fought back with a desperation born of knowing this was the end. He kicked, he punched, and he tried to grab the officer's gun.
I didn't do it.
But Lee prevailed. As he was being put into the patrol car, Bundy whispered, "I wish you had killed me." The trial of Ted Bundy in 1979 was a spectacle unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was the first trial to be televised nationally. Bundy, ever the narcissist, reveled in the attention. He acted as his own lawyer, cross-examining witnesses with a smug, condescending tone. He wore a blue blazer, smiled for the cameras, and even had groupies, young women who sat in the gallery every day, convinced that he was innocent because he was too handsome to be a killer. But the physical evidence was undeniable. The prosecution brought in a forensic dentist, Dr. Richard Souviron, Souviron. He presented a physical cast of Ted Bundy's teeth and compared it to a photograph of the bite marks found on Lisa Levy's body. They were a perfect match. Bundy's own body had betrayed him. On July 24, 1979, the jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. Guilty.
The jury find the defendant guilty.
When Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death, he spoke to Bundy with a strange fatherly sadness that became world famous. He said, "It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity as I've experienced in this courtroom. You're a bright young man. You would have made a good lawyer, and I would have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner."
Sentenced to life in prison.
Bundy's response was a hollow stare. The mask was gone. Only the void remained. For 9 years, Ted Bundy lived in a 6-by-9-foot cell at Florida State Prison. But even behind bars, he remained a master of manipulation.
Your Honor, based on the
In a bizarre
precedent
legal
sentencing
maneuver during his 1980 trial, he took advantage of an obscure Florida law to marry Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker, while she was testifying on his behalf in open court. He fathered a daughter while on death row, despite conjugal visits being strictly forbidden. He used his intellect to file appeal after appeal, pushing his execution date back 3 different times. He became a subject of intense study for the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. Special Agent Bill Hagmaier spent hundreds of hours talking to Ted. Hagmaier later said that Ted didn't just tell stories. He analyzed himself like a scientist studying a specimen. He spoke of the entity, a dark force within him that demanded to be fed. He claimed the entity was fueled by hardcore pornography, though many experts believe this was just another attempt to shift the blame away from his own choices. In January 1989, Ted Bundy ran out of time. His final appeals were exhausted. Desperate to live, he began to do what he had refused to do for a decade. He started to talk. In a frantic series of interviews, he confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. He led investigators to the remains of victims they hadn't found, and described crimes they didn't even know he had committed. But it was too late. The families of his victims had waited long enough for justice. On his final night, he called his mother. He spent his last hours praying with a minister and speaking with Agent Hagmaier. For the first time, the charming persona was gone. He was pale, trembling, and weeping. The morning of January 24th, 1989, felt like a holiday outside the prison gates. Hundreds of people gathered in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying signs that said, "Burn Bundy and Toast Ted." They were cooking breakfast on portable grills, an event the media dubbed the Bundy BBQ. Inside, at 7 a.m., Ted Bundy was strapped into Old Sparky, Florida's electric chair. When asked if he had any last words, he looked toward his lawyer and the minister and said, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." 2,000 volts of electricity surged through his body. At 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was pronounced dead. Outside, the crowd cheered. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders, but some investigators believe the true number is closer to 100. He was a wanderer, a hitchhiker, and a man who could blend into any crowd. To this day, there are cold cases across the United States that bear the mark of his hand. He remains the ultimate cautionary tale, the proof that evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like the man next door.
Well, hello there.
Sometimes,
Pleased to meet you.
it looks like a friend. We have covered the timeline, the psychology, and the end of one of history's most prolific predators. But the question remains, how many more Teds are out there today, hiding behind a smile and a well-pressed suit? Ted Bundy was often described as a genius, but if you look at the facts, he was often sloppy, lucky, and relied on the biases of a society that couldn't believe a handsome white man could be a killer. Do you think the media's obsession with his charm does an injustice to his victims, or is it a necessary part of understanding how he escaped justice for so long? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into the archive valuable, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have many more files to open. Speaking of which file should we open next? The mystery of the Zodiac? Or perhaps the unsettling disappearance of the Beaumont children? Tell us in the comments below. Until next time, stay observant.